Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen. You may be seated. This account of blind Bartimaeus, the beggar, is one that I think is probably pretty well known. And I don't think that it would have been an unusual thing to see at the beginning of the first millennium, walking into any major city. I'm sure that there were just lines and lines and lines of those who were blind and lame and beggars, who lined the way into each and every city. And I think that it's also not that uncommon to see today. As we drive throughout Wichita Falls, find many, many people who are begging on the side of the road. And I think it's easy for us to see ourselves as in some way different than them. But as we read through this text today, I think that we need to realize that this is not merely a historical account of a blind man named Bartimaeus. But more than that, the account itself is indicative of each of our spiritual lives. Each of us, in a sense, is blind Bartimaeus. Each of us have been spiritually blinded. Each of us are, in and of our own selves, unable to see the Lord. Each of us, in and of our own selves, are unable to see the way forward. Each of us has been blinded to our own sins and to our own sinfulness and to the way that we can escape them. And so I think that this account of blind Bartimaeus has stuck out in the mind of St. Mark and been recorded as it has been, not merely because of the miracle itself, but because of the lessons that we can glean from it, for how we ourselves can come out of our own blindness and into a new place of spiritual light. And so today we're going to take a deeper look at this text. Not just at the surface, not just at the man, not just at the miracle, but at the miracle that needs to happen in the hearts and the souls and the minds of each and every one of us as we hear that Jesus is walking past. And so let's begin taking a look at each of these steps. First of all, I want to skip all the way to the very end of the passage, to the last couple of sentences. It says this: after Jesus has already come by, Jesus has already called him, he's already called out for mercy, and he's already come up to Jesus. And when he hears that the Lord has called him, it says this: and throwing off his mantle, he sprang up and came to Jesus. Now, isn't that a wonderful line? St. Mark is known for something in his Gospels. He covers most of the same material that is covered in both Matthew and Luke in the same sort of a way. But in Mark's accounts, his accounts are always sharper and shorter. He has a way of boiling everything down just to the pure essence. He only gives you what you need to know. As a matter of fact, if you read the same passage in the Gospel of Matthew, you'll find that there were actually two blind men, one of which Mark totally neglects to refer to. Why? Because Mark's goal is to boil everything down into its essence, to only give you what you need to know. And so isn't it fascinating that if Mark is boiling everything down to just what you need to know, why would he give you this little tiny detail that he throws off his mantle? For some reason, that's stuck in Mark's mind as being particularly important. I would suggest to you that it's important because for each of us, it's really the first step. If we ourselves are moved from a place of spiritual blindness to spiritual light, then we must take the first step as blind Bartimaeus did as well. Note, Bartimaeus couldn't see yet. Can you imagine what type of a commotion this must have been? This blind man throwing off his jacket and his mantle and everything that held him back to run blindly to Jesus Christ through a crowd. You can see that he's just thrown all sense of securities away. And he's just charging forward to find Christ. I think this is important because this mantle symbolizes something. It symbolized something for Bartimaeus, and I think it also has to symbolize something for each and every one of us. You see, imagine what the mantle of a blind man must have looked like. A man who couldn't afford a roof over his head. A man who couldn't afford, let alone see, how dirty his clothes were. This is probably the same mantle that he'd had for years and years and years. He sat out upon the side of a road as people walked by, kicking dust up on this mantle that he wore. He'd probably sat out in the rain and in the sun. It had probably been eaten by bugs and had holes in it, and dirt and stains and so on and so forth, none of which he could have seen visibly with his eyes. You see, my friends, this mantle symbolizes, even for Bartimaeus, the entirety of his blindness. Not only his blindness, but its effects, what it has caused and resulted in his life. This is the case for many of us. All of the dark and dirty and difficult things in our lives all have a cause. And many of those things come back to our spiritual blindness. I think each of us has to sit here and ask ourselves, what is our mantle today? What is the dirty, holy, old, ragged mantle that we wear? But not only that, but what is its root cause? What has our spiritual blindness affected in our life? Do we find ourselves in a dark and a depressed place because we've been able to see the light of God? Do we find ourselves angry or despairing because we've lost hope in God's goodness? Do we find ourselves having a difficult time forgiving someone because we've lost track of God's mercy? Are we always finding the ugly things in the world and in other people because we've lost sight of God's beauty? I hope that when you think of things in this light, you can see that this spiritual blindness that is within us, this inability to see God for who He truly is, really and truly has its effects in our life. As a matter of fact, I tend to think that most of the things that we really struggle with deep down within, with the darkness, with the despair, with the anger, with the unforgiveness, with the lack of mercy, with the pessimism, all of these come back to having not been able to see God for who He truly is, which is goodness, justice, love, mercy, grace, forgiveness, and beauty. Blind Bartimaeus realized all of this. And so what did he do as a first step? He took that mantle and he threw it away. As you read through all of the spiritual greats throughout the history of Christianity, you'll find that for each and every one of them, the first step to spiritual sight is a step that they like to call purgation. To be purged of all that is dark within us. This step looks like repentance. It looks like a realization that we're holding on to something that is holding us down. We all together, like blind Bartimaeus, need to take this first step. Whatever that mantle is in your life that has been caused by this darkness, today is the day to take it off and to throw it away. Is it anger? Is it despair? Is it impatience? Is it a lack of mercy and forgiveness? Take it off. Throw it down. Leave it behind at the gate that you'll never come back to again. And run blindly towards Jesus Christ. The first step is purgation. And so what is the second step? Here we have blind Bartimaeus running blindly through a crowd, making his way, maybe haphazardly, to Jesus Christ. And Jesus says this. And Jesus said to him, "What do you want me to do for you?" As though it wasn't obvious. But for this, I would refer you back to last week's sermon about supplication. But it continues, and the blind man said to him, "Master, let me receive my sight." My friends, this is the next step for each and every one of us. After we've thrown away the symbols of our blindness, then we must deal with the root cause of our blindness itself. Let me tell you what, my friends, it is never enough just to decide not to be angry anymore. It's never enough just to decide that today, from now on, I'm going to be more optimistic. Because it'll never happen. What happens is we spend our entire lives growing into habits and forming this specific character. And once you've done that, it's impossible just in a moment's notice to quit cold turkey and suddenly just become an optimist or a happy person. It just doesn't happen that way. Instead, we need to spend the same amount of time being formed in a different sort of a way. But I think that the question is how do we do that? How do we throw off the blindness and really, really receive once again our sight? Well, I tend to think that it all comes down to what you're looking at. Blind Bartimaeus came straight to the person who could give him his sight. And I believe that each of us need to do the same thing. I believe that blind Bartimaeus, standing there before Jesus Christ and hearing his words, was already, before he could see or before he had been healed, trying to peer through the darkness of his eyes to behold the face of his Maker. And each of us needs to do the same thing. Instead of sitting lonely by our gate, by ourselves in our own despair, let us look and gaze through the darkness for the eyes of Jesus Christ. St. Paul says something over and over and over again in his epistles. One of the things that he said is this: "Forgive as you've been forgiven." Now, isn't that an interesting line? Jesus Christ said something very similar. He told us to pray every day in the Lord's Prayer, "Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us." That also is an interesting phrase, because I think that it has an important lesson within it for each and every one of us. As a priest, people come to me asking me about how they can forgive this person or that person. They know that their lack of forgiveness is eating away at their soul, but they don't know how to deal with it. And usually what I tell them is this advice of Christ and of St. Paul: forgive as you've been forgiven. Now that doesn't mean, well, I know I've been forgiven, therefore I just have to muster up the strength within me to get this forgiveness over with. No, not at all. What it means is that if you ever wish to become a forgiving person, you first of all must spend time basking in the forgiveness of God himself. You will never be able to forgive someone else for something that they've done to you until you realize that you're not much better yourself. That we ourselves, all of us, have done terrible things to the Lord. But yet, day after day after day, he holds out these arms of mercy. That's what the first step of purgation really does for us. It helps us to realize how deep down we are in this murk and in this darkness. And as we see how much we ourselves need grace, as we see how much we ourselves need mercy, as we see how much we ourselves need forgiveness, then it makes us a little bit easier on other people. The only way for us to forgive is for us to get off of our high horse and to come down before God himself and to realize how very lowly we are. How much we need his forgiveness. And how much, despite the holes of the nails in his hands, and despite his torn flesh on his back, he nonetheless looks at us and forgives us, regardless of what we've done. No matter how bad, no matter how deep, no matter how difficult, those holy hands are stretched out to us in love and in mercy and forgiveness. It is only by being illumined to the forgiveness of God that we ourselves can learn to forgive. The second step, my friends, as you go back to all the great spiritual greats of Christianity, is illumination. The first step is purgation, and the second step is illumination. To be enabled to see God for what he is. To be enabled to see his goodness and to experience his goodness, not only with our eyes, but deep in our souls. Because only in experiencing God and who he is can we then turn and become that for someone else. And this, my friends, leads us to our final step. After he receives his sight, it says this, and Jesus said to him, "Go your way, your faith has made you well." And immediately he received his sight and followed him on the way. Do you see what happened there? The natural response of this illumination, of seeing Christ for who he is because of what he has done for us, then results in blind Bartimaeus following Christ out of the city of Jericho. Now, I think that this is significant. Did you know that the word Jericho means moon? The word Jericho means the moon. I think that's rather appropriate, don't you think? Because what is the moon but the marker of the night? Here is Bartimaeus sitting in darkness, sitting in his own city of night. And Jesus Christ, who is light himself, came into Bartimaeus' darkness so that Bartimaeus could see his light and then follow him out. To gaze upon Jesus Christ for who he truly is. To gaze upon his goodness and experience it. To gaze upon his forgiveness and experience it. To gaze upon his beauty and experience it is necessarily fundamentally transformative. St. John talks about how one day we will see him as he truly is, and how we shall be made like him. The seeing of God for what he really and truly is results in our transformation into his likeness. Christ, the light, came into Bartimaeus' darkness so that Bartimaeus in darkness might become the light of Christ. And this, my friends, is something that is destined for each and every one of us. As a matter of fact, let me cue you in to a little secret. It's the purpose of your entire existence. To gaze upon the goodness and the beauty and the love and the grace of God. And to be made like it. To open our eyes and allow that light to shine into the darkness of our souls. And then to become light ourselves. This is the meaning of the incarnation. The light has come into a dark world to bring light. That's the significance. I've had a wonderful time this year keeping this light alive. Do you see that little white candle back there? That white candle means that Christ is in his presence in the tabernacle. We light that light every year at the Paschal, at the Easter Vigil. We bless the holy fire in the back after Good Friday, after all the lights in the church have gone out, and we celebrate his resurrection light. And then that light goes out and it lights every single light in the room. And we keep that light alive all year long. The meaning of the incarnation is that the light has come into the world. And that light isn't something that has to be hoarded. On the contrary, it's a light that is passed on from person to person to person to person. That's the most wonderful thing about that light right there, is every single light in the church for the entire year has been lit off of that light. The light of Christ. Every single week, this light expands and contracts and expands and contracts. This one fire has lasted an entire year and has been shared with hundreds and hundreds of people. That is what is supposed to happen to each and every one of us as we ourselves receive the illumination of Christ. We are to become his light. We are to become his candle. And we are to pass off that light, that goodness, that mercy, that forgiveness, that beauty on to other people as well. As Christ has come into our darkness and lightened us with his goodness, so we are to go out and lighten others with his goodness as we have been transformed into his likeness. My friends, that is the point of all of this. And the last step, the first step was purgation, and the second was illumination, which leads naturally to the third step, which is called union. To be united with Christ in his goodness and his love and his forgiveness and his grace, and to become that to other people. And so, my friends, let us take these very steps. Let us become Bartimaeus. Let us leave our ancient position at the gates of darkness, at the gates of the moon, at the gates of Jericho. Let us leave our night and be called to the light, which is Christ himself. Let us throw off the mantle of darkness in our purgation. Let us stare into the light of Christ and be illuminated by his goodness. And through this illumination, may we come into union with him and be transformed in his presence and become his likeness to the whole world. Let us say with blind Bartimaeus at the gate, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost.